Hey, you guys, I'm going to be reading you a book called Sleepy Hollow Sleepover by Ron Roy. It's a mystery, so see if you can figure out the clues and who the bad guys are. Chapter 1. Starting today, I'm changing my ice cream flavor, Josh said. He was staring into the sweet youth ice cream shop window. From now on, I'm only eating raspberry. But you always choose pistachio, Dink said. I've known you 5 years, and it's pistachio every time. Josh shrugged. I guess I'm tired of green, he said. Ruth Rose poked the boys. How about that green, Josh? She asked. Green money. An armored truck had pulled up to the bank next to the ice cream shop. Three men wearing dark green uniforms unloaded bags of money onto a cart. Two of the guards pushed the cart through the glass doors into the bank. The third man watched over the truck. Josh grinned. Can't I have red ice cream and green money? He asked. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose were in Tarrytown, New York. It was Halloween day, and families from all over had come to Tarrytown for a big party and haunted hayride. Dink watched some kids and their parents enter the ice cream shop next to the bank. The guards came out of the bank with the empty cart, climbed into the truck, and drove away. Ruth Rose walked to the bank window. She tapped a finger against the glass. This hayride is going to be so cool, she said. The kids read the sign hanging inside the window. It said, Don't miss the haunted hayride and Halloween party tonight. Food, games, a bonfire, and lots of spooky stuff. And watch out for the headless horseman. He'll be watching you. In the window behind the sign stood a big brown horse. A curtain separated the horse from the rest of the bank. The kids knew that the horse was fake, but it looked real. On top of the horse sat a dummy of a man dressed in black. A cloak hung from his shoulders, but his head was missing. How can the headless horseman be watching us? Josh asked. The dude has no eyes. Who is that guy anyway? Ruth Rose opened her book bag. In it were her Swiss Army knife, a couple of books, and her cell phone. She pulled out a guidebook for New York State and opened to the pages about Tarrytown. Listen to this, she said. A writer named Washington Irving wrote a story called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It was about a school teacher named Ichabod Crane who lived here in Tarrytown. Hey, I saw that movie, Josh said. Yeah, but first it was a book, Josh, Dink said. Keep reading, Ruth Rose. Anyway, this teacher was in love with a woman named Katrina, but some other guy loved her too. His name was Brom Bones. So in the story, Mr. Bones dressed up as a headless horseman to scare Ichabod Crane out of town. Did it work? Josh asked. Yep. Old Ichabod mysteriously disappeared and Katrina married Brom Bones. But it was all fake, right? There really was no headless horseman. Brom Bones didn't want anyone to know that he was the headless horseman, so he told people it was the ghost of a soldier who had lost his head in battle. And at night, his ghost rides around Tarrytown looking for the head. Gross! Look, guys, Dink said, pointing to a window. A woman had stepped out from behind the curtain. She opened a hidden door in the side of the horse. The woman reached an arm inside the horse, then pulled it back out. She disappeared behind the curtain again. Suddenly, the horse's head moved up and down. Then the legs and feet started pumping in place. The man on the horse's back leaned forward like a jockey in a race. One hand began slapping the horse with a small whip. The horse looked like it was running. This is so awesome. It's a mechanical horse, Ruth Rose said. She handed the book to Dink, pulled out her cell phone, and snapped a bunch of pictures. A crowd of people had gathered to watch the horse and rider. One little boy started to cry. That's a scary man, he said. The boy's father scooped him up. It's not real, Simon, the man said. It's just a big action figure. That man is only a stuffed doll. He's scary and I hate him and I want ice cream now, Simon howled. The man laughed and carried the little boy into the ice cream shop. We're looking at our own private piñata, a quiet voice said from behind Dink. Dink glanced at the window and saw a reflection of two men. They wore dark glasses and baseball caps. Yeah, and tomorrow Bonnie will fill it with green candy, the man's buddy said. After a few minutes, the mechanical horse began to slow down. Finally, it stopped moving altogether. The crowd of people drifted away. That was so cool, Ruth Rose said. He's scary and I hate him, Josh whined. Sounded like little Simon. And I want ice cream now. Dink laughed. As the three kids backed away from the window, Dink stepped on someone's toes. Sorry, he said. He turned to the two men who he overheard talking about a piñata. No problem, kid, one of the men said. He pointed to his feet. He was wearing cowboy boots with silver toes. Nothing can hurt these. The man's friend pulled on his arm. Come on, Ace. We got work to do. Ace and his friend walked away. Come on, Josh, mimicked with a gruff voice. We have ice cream to eat. He pulled Dink and Ruth Rose into the ice cream shop. Chapter 2. Licking their ice cream cones, the kids walked to the edge of town. They took a footpath that led into a forest. The tall trees blocked out the October sun. How's the new flavor? Ruth Rose asked Josh. She had chosen strawberry, her favorite. Dink's was maple walnut. My brain thinks it's okay, Josh said, but my tongue keeps expecting to taste pistachio. What brain? Josh asked him. Josh poked him back. The brain that's going to whip you in Monopoly tonight. We won't have time to finish a whole game, Ruth Rose said. It's almost 5 o'clock and the hayride is at 7. The way I play, I'll be rich by 6:30, Josh poked. They were staying with Dink's father in a small cabin in the forest. A few other families had rented cabins too. Each cabin was named after something creepy. Dink's dad had chosen one called Haunted House. The name was painted on a sign on the front porch railing. When they reached the cabin, Dink's father was sitting in a rocking chair on the porch. An open book was in his lap. Hey, kids, he said as they approached. How was town? A lot of other kids are here for the hayride, Ruth Rose told him. And we saw a headless horseman. Only it was fake, Josh said. What are you reading, Dad? It's a history of Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow, he said. Is there really a headless horseman who rides around looking for his head? Josh asked Mr. Duncan. Why, I believe there is, Dink's father answered. He pointed to a map in his book. This is the area we're in right now. According to legend, this is where the original headless horseman scared Ichabod Crane out of town. Aw, Mr. Duncan, you're messing with me, right? Would I tease you, Josh? Come on, Dink said. If we're going to play Monopoly, we should get started. You kids hungry? Oh, never mind. I see ice cream on your lips. Yeah, Josh whined until we bought him some, Dink said. Inside the cabin, Dink went toward a small chest under a window. Painted on its side was the word games. He opened the chest and a skeleton popped up. Oh my goodness! Dink yelled, jumping back. Josh and Ruth Rose laughed. They ran around the cabin, pulling open drawers and peeking inside cupboards and closets. They found a witch in a closet, a bunch of fake bats in a drawer, and a goblin in the bathroom. Dad, who did all this? Dink asked. Maybe the headless horseman got in here, he said in a creepy voice. I wonder what he put inside your sleeping bags. He crumpled some paper and started a fire in the fireplace. Ha, Josh said. He glanced at the 3 sleeping bags stacked in the corner. The kids finally found the Monopoly game. They set it up on the floor in front of the crackling fire. A half hour later, Dink looked up. Did you hear something? He asked the others. Don't try to change the subject. You're losing big time. I'm not changing the subject. I heard something like running feet. Dink got up and walked over to the window. It had grown dark outside. He saw his reflection in the glass and the flickering flames of the fire behind him. He heard it again, a thudding noise. Then he saw a light among the dark trees. Guys, come here. Dink's father, Josh, and Ruth Rose joined him at the window. What is it, son? I saw a light. It was moving through the trees. If you're messing around, Josh started to say, and then he gasped. A horse raced out of the trees past the cabin window. A rider carrying a jack-o'-lantern sat on the horse's back. The horse stopped, and the rider held the jack-o'-lantern high in the air. What on earth is anyone doing riding around in the dark? Dink's father asked. Dink noticed the flowing cloak just like on the rider he had seen in the bank window. Only this one wasn't fake. This was a real man and a real horse. Then Dink looked above the man's shoulders. There was nothing there. I think he's looking for his head, Dink whispered. It's the headless horseman, Ruth Rose screamed. Lock the door, Josh wailed. No way, Ruth Rose said. She grabbed her cell phone. I'm getting a picture of this. I'll go with you, Dink said. Coming, Josh? Not for $1 million, he said. Chapter 3. Dink and Ruth Rose ran outside. They were just in time to see the headless horseman gallop past. Ruth Rose held up her phone and snapped a picture. The horse and rider disappeared into the trees. Did you get the picture, Dink asked? I don't know. Look, all I got was a blur. He was going too fast. They headed back to the cabin. Josh opened the door and peeked out. He looked scared. Don't worry, he's gone. So am I. Where's the phone? I'm calling a taxi. Josh, we're in the middle of the woods. A taxi would charge a ton of money to come out here, and you don't have any money. Remember, I had to pay for your ice cream today. Then I'll walk home. I'm not staying where guys with no heads hang out. Mr. Duncan, how far is it back to Green Lawn? Over 100 miles, Josh. It would take you until tomorrow night to make it home. What if some bear didn't eat you first? I heard there are lots of bears in these woods. Then I'll hitchhike. Maybe a certain guy on a certain horse will pick you up. You guys aren't scaring me. Yeah. Josh grinned. Okay, you are scaring me. Josh, do you really think that guy had no head? I saw him, Dinkus. There was nothing above his collar. It must have been a trick. His head was probably tucked down inside his cape where we couldn't see it. The hayride wagon should be here soon, Dink's father said. He poked the fire and picked up his book. The kids went back to Monopoly. You landed on one of my hotels, Josh cried. You owe me $2,000. I only have $400. You'll have to finish the game later, Dink's father said. The wagon's here. Yay! Ruth Rose grabbed 3 masks from a table next to a sofa. She, Dink, and Josh had decided to get 3 Stooges masks. She was Larry, Dink was Curly, and Josh had chosen the Mo mask. Take your sweaters. It's getting colder tonight. The kids put on their sweaters and their masks and ran to open the door. A wagon stood in the clearing in front of the cabin steps. The wagon was piled with hay, and a few kids were lying in it. A big, long-legged workhorse was hitched to the wagon. It had a droopy mane and huge feet. A driver wearing a big coat and floppy hat sat up front holding the reins. A girl popped out of the hay and smiled down at Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose. She was dressed as a cowgirl. I like your mask, she said. Come on up. There's a ladder in the back. Call me when you get to the party, Dink's father said. Driver, what time will you bring them back? 10 o'clock, the driver said. His voice was deep, like it came from a hollow place. Dink shivered. Something about this driver was strange. Was it just his deep voice? And why didn't he look at them? Dink walked to the back of the wagon. Josh and Ruth Rose had already climbed up and were half buried in the hay pile. Dink found the ladder and joined the other kids in the hay. He flopped on his back and took off his mask. He looked up at the moon shining through the trees and took a deep breath. The hay smelled sweet like a kitten's breath. I'm Candy, the girl said, and these are my brothers, Andy and Adam. We're from New York City. One of the boys wore a black mask that covered his eyes, ears, forehead, and hair. The top part of the mask had small, pointy ears. The other brother's mask covered just his eyes. I'm Batman, said the first boy and pointed at his brother. That's Andy. He's supposed to be Robin, my trusty sidekick. Andy grinned above his mask. He had pieces of hay stuck in his curly blonde hair. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose introduced themselves. We're from Green Lawn, Connecticut, Dink said. We were here last year too, Adam said. He was tall and lanky with a wide grin. The horse plodded through the woods. After a few minutes, it stopped next to a tree. Halfway up the trunk, Dink saw a wide black hole. The driver reached up and thumped the trunk with a pole he had on the seat next to him. Suddenly, an explosion of black flying objects erupted from the hole. High-pitched squeaking filled the air around the wagon. Dink saw, heard, and felt hundreds of bats darting past them. Dive, Ruth Rose yelled. Then they heard the driver laughing, and the wagon lurched forward. You planned that, right? Josh asked the driver. The driver didn't answer. He flicked the horse's neck with reins, and they continued walking on. That guy's creeping me out. There's something weird about him. He doesn't talk. What if he kidnaps us? What if he's really a ghoul and he takes us to a cave and... Ghouls don't live in caves, Ruth Rose said. Yeah, they live in graves, Candy said. Hey, Candy, you made a poem. Dink laughed. Suddenly, something flew toward them. It's a witch. Watch out, Josh. She's going to put you in her pot and blow you with a bunch of frog's eyes. Yummy. I love frog stew. All 6 kids began laughing and yelling. The witch flew low over the wagon. She wore a black hat and a flowing cloak. As suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. How'd he do that? Andy asked. Who? The driver. He made those bats attack us too. Maybe he's a magic ghoul. But they stopped laughing when the wagon pulled up next to a small cemetery. Moonlight and shadows made the place look spooky. The 6 kids looked over the side of the wagon. There were only about a dozen tombstones. Most were broken and crumbling on the ground, but there was one new-looking grave marker. The stone stood at the head of an open grave. A pile of dirt was mounded next to the hole. This is new, Adam whispered. There was no grave last year. I don't like this. Dink didn't like it either. He figured the bats and the witches had been jokes, but this felt different. Dink started to turn toward the driver, but something caught his eye. A hand was rising out of the grave. Then came an arm covered in filthy rags. A second hand and arm appeared, then a face blotched with dirt. Some of the flesh was peeling off and the hair was ragged, half missing from the head. I want to go home, Josh wailed. The terrible creature crawled from the grave and staggered toward the wagon. Dink thought he was going to faint. He tried to move, but he had turned to stone. The man from the grave reached the wagon and jumped onto the ladder. The kids all screamed as the monster stretched out a hand. He grabbed Dink's ankle and yelled, "Feed me." The driver turned around and bonked the man on the head with a wooden pole. The man fell off the wagon onto the trailer. I'm so hungry. The kids watched the man lurch back toward the grave. Cool, Andy said. Did you see that awesome mask? Mask? Was that another trick? Sure, all this stuff is planned just to scare us. But he really grabbed me. I could really feel his fingers. Just then, the driver started laughing. He laughed so hard, he had to put down the reins and the horse stopped walking. The driver rocked in his seat, holding his head and laughing. And then suddenly, his head flew off his shoulders and landed in the hay between the kids. Red, gooey blood oozed from his neck. The 6 kids screamed and tried to back away. Wait a minute. That's not a real head. It's just a hollow pumpkin. He's right, Josh said. Look, it's been painted to look like a face. And that's fake blood, Ruth Rose said. That's right, a voice said. The kids looked at the driver. A smiling man looked over at them. I'm Officer Cleaver. Hope my buddy back there didn't scare you too much. That guy from the grave was your friend? The driver nodded. Yep, that's Officer Riley. We're both police officers. Are you ready for the party?